My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. We have a good one today. At least it's a really interesting topic from my perspective. We are continuing our student perspective series, and we have Dr. Thilo Beck from South Africa, and he is going to be talking to us about cobras. He recently finished his degree, so it's kind of an interesting perspective within the student perspectives umbrella. Again, talking about, in my mind, one of the most fascinating groups of venomous snakes on the planet. And just Africa, just a really magical place from a snake perspective and beyond. So welcome to the podcast, Thilo. How are you doing today?
Hi, Chris. I'm very good. It's hot here, it's summery, and I'm excited to be chatting to you about cobras.
Yeah, great. Yeah, a lot of people probably forget that fact that while we're sitting, hey, if you're sitting in the United States, for example, we're sitting in the middle of our winter, but you're obviously on the opposite end of the spectrum and experiencing your summer. So, excited to talk to you about this topic. But before we do that, before we get into it, I'd like to learn about, the person that I'm talking to. And I like to start at the very beginning. And so, a lot of the world looks at people like us and thinks it's kind of an odd thing, snakes and our interest in snakes. And so I like to figure out the origins of that. And so for you, how did you get into snakes? Is it something you've always been into since you were a child, or something that kind of came on more recent in life?
So I grew up in Germany, right? And I was always interested in the snakes there as a little child. My parents' nightmare was when we'd go camping somewhere in Italy or Croatia, and 10-year-old me would be running back to the tent with a snake in my hand, asking him what it is. I've always been interested in the snakes, that side, and in the reptiles in Europe, but didn't do it professionally until I moved to South Africa in 2018. I got sidetracked along the way. I basically, after I finished high school, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I decided to do an internship at a research center in Namibia. I was 18 at the time, and I was there for 6 months. And just before I got there, their local snake catcher had left. And I was 18 and naive. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to catch those snakes that come onto the research center that are not wanted there. In that case, it was mostly horned adders and western barred spitting cobras, which are really dangerous. And I, at that point, definitely did not know what I was doing. And looking back at it, I'm grateful that I didn't get bitten.
Let's. I want to go back to Germany, and then I have some questions about Namibia as well. But so, grew up in Germany, and what was I've interviewed multiple people from Europe, and I have multiple colleagues I know from Europe, but I've actually never really interviewed or talked to anyone much about snakes in Germany. So, what was it like where you grew up in Germany? First of all, was it urban or rural? Did you spend time out? What types of snakes would you see in Europe? I mean, you mentioned places, more Mediterranean type places, but curious about Germany, and then also kind of what types of snakes would you be finding, down in that Mediterranean? And maybe you were so young. That's how I was. I'd catch a snake when I was young or see one, and I wouldn't even know what it was. But just curious what that European experience was like from a snake perspective.
Yeah, so you spot on. I basically, most of the snakes that I picked up there as a child, I had no idea what I was looking at. I grew up close to Frankfurt, in the middle of Germany, in a small town with like 100,000 people living there. But we have a forest close by, and in those forests are big lakes and ponds. And I'd find the water snakes there, Natrix.
Okay.
So that is about the only snake that I can remember where I was like, okay, that is definitely that. By far the most common snake you find there. And I also came across Aesculapian snakes every now and again, the biggest snakes we get in Germany, I believe. But I also have to admit that I'm a lot more familiar with South African snakes than I am with German snakes.
Yeah.
Or European snakes even. I mean, I've spent basically most of my time studying snakes was here in South Africa.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll get into that. You mentioned your parents. I'm assuming they still live in Germany. You said it was kind of their nightmare, you bringing back snakes and this type of thing. Like, what was kind of your parents' reaction when you were like, I'm gonna go off to Namibia, I'm going to Africa, and they probably saw this like developing interest in snakes. Kind of what was their response? Have they been very supportive, or?
They have been incredibly supportive, and I'm really, really grateful for that. I mean, my mom still frequently brings up, even now at my graduation, which was 4 weeks ago, she said that she still somehow wishes I'd be into hamsters instead of snakes, because then she wouldn't be worried as much, because I'm a snake catcher now here in South Africa, and I do snake relocations, and I like snake photography, so I interact with these highly venomous snakes on a somewhat regular basis. But along every step of the way, they have supported me so much. They've never tried to stop me. They've obviously told me to take it easy and to think carefully about what I'm doing, and reminded me of how dangerous these animals are and how careful I have to be with them, but also trusted in me completely and knew that I was capable of doing this safely. In our family, when we've talked about this, we've often compared handling venomous snakes to driving a car really fast, which is a big thing in Germany. I'm sure you're aware that many highways in Germany don't have a speed limit. So anyone can get onto the highway in their, BMW and put the pedal to the floor and drive 250 kilometers an hour, wow, which is also inherently very dangerous. And you have to concentrate a lot. And the smallest mistake can result in a serious injury or death. But if you are concentrating and if you're not under the influence of alcohol or drugs or whatever, you can do it safely, carefully, well considered. And that's kind of how me and my family have been talking about this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's how I've always talked about snake handling too. It's in that, like, I mean, it could be dangerous, but if you know what you're doing and you are kind of cautious in how you do it, and it's no more dangerous than a lot of other activities that humans do. I always use the analogy. I like the car, the in Germany analogy, but I always kind of use the analogy of like a nail gun, like one of these like air pressured guns people would use to like build a house. Like if you don't know what you're doing with that, and a lot of people do, they end up putting nails through their hands or their legs or what have you. But if you know how to use a nail gun, it's just kind of a standard, activity that's, you can be pretty safe doing, and venomous snakes are the same way. So
100%.
How, so you go down to Namibia, and your parents, sounds like, reluctantly, but completely supportive of you. So first of all, Namibia is a big place, and there's a lot of different, kind of ecosystems or environments, habitats in that country. And, in particular, it has some of the most, I think, I've never been, but, from what I've read and what I've seen in photos and videos, like some of the most amazing deserts in the world. And so, tell us a little bit. You said there's a research center that you went to work at. Where was that in the country relative to the different ecosystem types and, that sort of thing?
Okay. So the research center is called Cobra Research Center, and it's about a 2-hour drive from Swakopmund towards the southeast. And the location is incredibly interesting because it's on the northern boundary of the Namib Sand Sea. So it's kind of sitting at the spot where you have three ecosystems. You have the Sand Sea going towards the south. It's like 400 kilometers just of sand desert.
Mm-hmm.
Then right at the research center is the Cusep riverbed, which is a river in inverted commas because it has water for like a week per year. It's usually dry. And then on the other side of that dry riverbed, you have the gravel plains, which looks like the moon. It's literally no shrubs, no trees. It's just endless gray gravel, and every now and again a rocky outcrop. It's spectacular. They've been there for, I think, 70 or 80 years at Research Center. They do some incredible long-term research. They have cool internship programs, and I was one of those interns where you are just helping with long-term programs that they're doing. Lots of plant work, lots of reptile work, climate studies. Very cool. And because you have this interface of these three different environments, there are some really cool comparisons of, like, for example, snakes and also lizards occurring, like the same species occurring on all three different environments and then looking quite differently. Like the horned adders in that area, quite interesting. The ones that you find in the gravel plains look dramatically different to the ones you'd encounter in the Sand Sea or in the riverbed.
Huh. Just color-wise or size-wise? What was different about them?
Color-wise.
Okay.
Very color-wise. The same also with the barking geckos. I believe they've just split up the barking geckos in that area into, I think, 8 or 9 different species. So I was there, when I was there, it was 2012. So I have to actually relook at my photos. I don't actually know which species I saw now that they're all split. I saw a couple of them and dramatically different coloration matching the substrate that they're on. So the ones in the gravel plains are going to be a lot grayer, where the sand dunes are bright red, and the ones closer to the sand dunes are going to have that like red speckling to blend in much better.
Huh, that is really cool. I'd love to go to that spot someday. But so you're an intern at this research center, and you end up taking that role of kind of moving snakes that find their way into the compound. And where do you go from there?
Okay, so that's where I think gets interesting. So basically, I'm there for half a year. I assist with all kinds of research projects. I'm just a general research assistant. I also catch those snakes because that's important, because that's the first time that I noticed how interesting Southern African snakes are. Mm-hmm. It really opened my eyes, whereas previously I was interested in the German snakes, but wow, German snakes don't stand a chance against what I found there. But the biologists that I worked with there all had positions that didn't really interest me. They were all working in, from my perspective, not that interesting zoo or museum setups with very little field work. All these people were as passionate about being outside than I was. If they would have had a choice, they would have spent the whole year running around in the desert and chasing lizards. But because of the nature of their work, they got like 5 days a year to do this kind of thing, short field trips. And then they went back into a dark cubicle. And that wasn't for me. So actually, when I finished my internship there, I flew back to Germany and I decided I do not want to be a herpetologist. I want to study geography. Mm-hmm. Okay. Which, like, I studied this in Mainz, and the degree there is very climate focused, which I enjoyed, but I was able to choose herpetology as an elective. So I tried to sneak the snake side of things back into so for like half a year, studied some herpetology there, and I had to do another internship for that degree, an 8-week internship. And this time I did it in South Africa with the Alexander Herb Lab at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg under Graham Alexander. Mm-hmm. I was there for 8 weeks and we tested snake repellent. I'm not sure if you're aware of what snake repellent is.
I have heard of it, but I know very little to nothing about it.
Yeah, so in South Africa on the shelves, you can buy a product called Snake Repel. And we spent 8 weeks showing that it's not effective. We tested a whole bunch of natural remedies as well that are meant to keep snakes out of the yard. And I spent the 8 weeks studying this, and I was surrounded by people who did the most fascinating behavioral research on snakes that I've ever seen. It was so interesting. Lots of cool studies on puff adders and sun gazers and Cape Cobras and all kinds of stuff. And after I finished that internship, Graham Alexander told me, Thilo, go back to Germany, finish your degree, come back here, do your master's here. And that's what I did. I flew back. I think I had like another year maybe in Germany. And then in 2018, I moved to South Africa to start my master's on the thermal biology of Cape Cobras in the Kalahari, which then got upgraded into a PhD, which I graduated from just 4 weeks ago.
Gotcha. And so you're in, well, let me back up. So, Brian Moritz, who you obviously know, he's been on the podcast. I've known him for many years. And he has worked in Namibia and other places. Did you meet Brian back in your Namibia days or no?
No. Brian, I met in 2018, basically when, like, I knew who Brian was, but I hadn't met him. And Brian Moritz and Graham Alexander are really close, both professionally and just personally. And Graham suggested that Brian could become my co-supervisor when I start studying the Cape Cobras in the Kalahari. So I met him and his wife first in 2018.
Gotcha. And so Graham is in Johannesburg, right? But Brian's in Cape Town. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But you went to school at Johannesburg, not in Cape Town.
Yes, exactly. So I was registered at Wits in Johannesburg, and then Brian was co-supervising me. During the final years of my PhD, I did spend some time in Cape Town because my girlfriend was working there. So I also moved to Cape Town, and this is post-COVID, so remote work was very much acceptable. And I was working part-time remotely, and part-time I was working in Brian's lab in Cape Town at the University of the Western Cape.
Okay. And so, with the snake repellent, first of all, I don't know if they're the same, but we have similar products here in the United States that people go out and distribute around their property, and similarly, they do not work. So, I don't know if they're the same products or different, but it's just amazing how many the venom and snake bites is such like a fantastic thing to people, such a horrific thing, like it blown way out of proportion to what the real issue is. And I live in the U.S. and we have different treatment than a lot of places, say in Africa or parts of Asia. But so I don't want to minimize it, but the at least here the true danger of dying from a snake bite is way blown out of proportion. You've got a much greater chance of dying driving to work. But because then you end up with all these products and people making money off things that, just really don't work. So that's interesting that you guys were working on that. When you were working on the repellent, was that right in Johannesburg? And what were some of the species that people were trying to repel?
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a break and tell you guys that snakes are one of the most persecuted groups of animals in the world, but we are dedicated to changing that. The Oriane Society works every day to ensure there's a future for these amazing animals. If you care about snakes, wildlife, or wild places, and you like what you've been hearing on the Snake Talk podcast, support us today by donating on our website at www.oriane.org.
Yeah, okay, so this was in Johannesburg. We did everything in a lab setting. There was later on a field-based study close to Pretoria done by another master's student who did his master's on this, basically complementing our lab-based approach in the field. The snake repellent that you get here is incredibly predatory. The whole structure of it, how it's set up, is they're just trying to prey on uneducated people. It's actually really upsetting. The product itself is really expensive. The instructions of users that you have to use like 2 or 3 bottles every 4 weeks around your garden. You're meant to spray it around your garden. But obviously the first rain is going to wash it away. So you need to reapply. So people are going to lose so much money on a product that does not work better than water, which is what we showed in the lab using puff adders and brown house snakes, because that was what we had easily available. And then in the field, they tested it on also, I think, at least snouted cobras, might have also been Mozambique spitting cobras, but a whole range of snakes. In the field, they did a trapping study showing that it's not effective in deterring any species of snake of entering the trap.
That's it. So how are you guys getting the word out to communities and society in general there that, hey, you're wasting your money doing this? Is there some big kind of like marketing communications plan to get that information out?
So we do have to be a little bit careful with that here in South Africa, because that company has sued people before here that tried to stop them. But I personally, when I have seen it in the shelf in the supermarket, I have gone to a person working there, and I asked to see if I can ask them if I could speak to the manager. And I told them that I'm a herpetologist. I have done a study on this. There are popular articles about this that I can send around, that this is a scam. It's just a straight up scam that's extracting money of people. The master students who did this project on this for his master's dissertation is in the process of publishing the peer-reviewed study as well. But for the general public, like when I speak to someone working in the supermarket here in South Africa, the popular article is good enough for now for them to see, okay, this stuff does not work. There are multiple universities working on this. We've shown with many different species, you may as well just spray water around your house. It's going to be a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of here where I live in the Appalachian Mountains in the U.S., we get a lot of timber rattlesnakes and copperheads in particular that end up in people's yards. People live pretty rurally out in the woods here. And, there's all kinds of questions about that. Like, how do I keep snakes out of my yard? And what we do, we go in and kind of consult. Like, I'll go to somebody's property, or my staff will, and we'll look at the property. And we're not like, spray this, put this type of fencing up, do X, Y, and Z. It's all about like landscaping, where you include rock, where you pile your wood, where you do all these things. And we've found that we can best control the distribution of snakes on somebody's property by just how they manage their property, essentially. So anyways, it's a big issue here.
100%. That is the same here. When I'm a local snake catcher here, so if somebody has a snake in their garden or in their house, I go and I assist them. And a couple of months ago, I was caught to a black mamba at a property, and we get there, and they have a chicken coop, but they're never taking the hay out. So you have this like almost knee deep layer of hay with rodents and everything.
Oh,
it's obviously a mamba heaven. And this person is asking, why is the snake here? And I was like, you have a breeding ground for rats here. This is like the local McDonald's around your corner. It's very tasty for the mamba. The mamba is definitely going to follow that scent. So if I was you, I'd just clean this a lot more frequently. Keep this nice and clean. If you basically don't provide any food source for the snake and no basking spot, you're going to see a lot of snakes a lot less frequently. And keep your yard clean. It's, in the end, I do think it's quite straightforward to not invite snakes into people's houses if they don't want them to.
Yeah. You mentioned being a snake catcher. Is that like a specific designation there in South Africa? Like you have some level of whatever it is, certification, or you're just on some list and people can call you? What is a snake catcher in Johannesburg?
So I no longer live in Johannesburg.
Oh, okay.
I'm now in Mthunzini, in the KZN North Coast, just above Durban.
Okay.
And basically, yes, I do have a qualification as a snake catcher. So that means I'm just proficient in snake handling. And then I am on local lists in the area that we're living in and in the neighborhood. There are different WhatsApp groups where people can say, here, I have a snake in my garden. Can someone come have a look? And then they'll forward my number and I'm going to go and help them. Or my favorite is if they just send a photo and I see it's something harmless and I call them and say, listen, I know it's a snake and people are scared of it, but this one is a harmless little Natal green snake. It's only going to eat geckos. Don't worry about it. You can give him a name. Just leave him in your garden. It's going to be okay. We live in a place with a lot of biodiversity. We may as well appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good perspective. So, okay, so you come back from Germany to South Africa after you do this internship, and then you come back down to do your master's with Graham, and you mentioned it was on Cape Cobras. And so, how did you did you come into a project that was already kind of set up? Like Graham had resources in place, he had ideas and questions around these cobras, or was it did you come down and he was like, well, what are you interested in? What was kind of like the genesis of your project?
It was a mix. So Graham and Brian, they had just found Tswalu Kalahari Reserve as a good study site to study Cape Cobras. So they were looking to find a student that would study the free-ranging Cape Cobras at Tswalu. And Graham has been interested in the thermal biology of reptiles for a long time. He did his PhD on wrinkles and has since done some spectacular studies on python thermal biology and puffer thermal biology. So he was really looking to create a study that would draw comparisons to his puffer work and also to his wrinkles work in a completely different snake. And at Swallow, we had the opportunity to do that with Cape Cobras, where there are not that many studies on free-ranging cobras for a bunch of reasons. One of them is it's difficult to find enough of them for a meaningful sample size without relying on relocations. Mm-hmm. Because often for this kind of work, relocated snakes are not really suitable because you can't guarantee that they're behaving like a normal snake. Yeah. So you can't use the snakes that are caught in a city and relocated for this kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So there are also ethical reasons. Oh, yeah?
Oh, no. I was just going to say, so Graham and Brian were already kind of working on the species and were interested in thermal biology, but then you were allowed kind of within that umbrella, if you will, to kind of develop some of your ideas for the project. Is that fair to say?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they've basically opened the door to this and said, listen, Cape Cobras at Swallow are really cool. We can ask some interesting questions about thermal biology and hopefully answer them as well.
Yeah.
And from then it took off. I think before I got there, they had caught like 19 or 20 snakes. And then in the next 3 years, we caught another 120 more.
Wow, that's amazing. So, let me give my little plug for, so I did my PhD in a lab. I was one of the last grad students with one of like kind of the grandfathers of thermal biology and snakes. And I always I've made this plug before on the podcast, but I feel like if you're going to study, the ecology, the biology of especially terrestrial reptiles, like understanding like environmental physiology, thermal biology is, you don't have to not everybody needs to be doing a graduate project on it like you did, but like, it's not something you can ignore. Like that you should at least have some base coursework and you need to think about it. Cause again, especially with terrestrial reptiles, it is it's like the dominant feature, in everything that they do. And so it's critically important, but I see so many people who end up, at least here in the States, studying reptiles and amphibians, get no background in thermal biology, environmental physiology, biophysics, whatever it might be. But I'm just making my plug to the audience in general. Like if you want to get into this field, and you really want to understand these animals and why they do what they do when, like you need at least some background in the types of things we're talking about, because it dominates their biology. Anyways, that's my soapbox. Yeah. But so before we get into depth into the project that you developed for your master's, I want to do two things. First of all, I'd love to give like the really high level overview of what are Cape Cobras. So like, have you tell us a little bit about like where you find them, what they eat, what they, just I'm talking like the field guide, like what's a Cape Cobra? And then also, that same level description of like this place that you are. I think you called it the Kalahari Desert Reserve. Is that the title? Or you can correct me when you're describing it. But yeah, if you could talk about both of those things, I think it would be a good kind of framework or background for us to really get in depth about, the cobra's thermal biology.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I also wanted to say you are completely right with your take on thermal biology. I mean, it's obviously easy to say as a physiologist, but thermal biology is everything. It drives so many factors of behavior and activity patterns in their biology. When it comes to snakes and reptiles, thermal biology is the basis of it all. And is, on top of it, at least for me, incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cape Cobras are a large active foraging snake. They're obviously part of the cobra family, a true cobra, Naja nivea. When you find a big one, it's around 2 meters long, maybe 2 meters and 10. Wow. The color is really variable. It can be ranging from like dark brown, almost black, to very light yellow, and everything in between. They even come with speckles sometimes. So you get these really light colored ones, like mustard yellow with dark spots in it. But then also you get a chocolate brown with light spots on it and varying degrees of coloration in between, but they're usually uniform. So the base color is going to be either brown, like a different shade of brown, different shade of yellow. They occur in the arid half of Southern Africa. So you get them kind of from Cape Town along the coast to Port Elizabeth, I reckon. And then through the Free State up into the southwestern half of Botswana, straight across Namibia, and then back down. So they're really well adapted to hot and dry conditions, which is also one of the reasons why we studied them, because these snakes are navigating really, really harsh conditions. There's very little rain there. It's very hot, very little cover. And so their thermal biology is quite interesting in that regard. And they're also potently neurotoxic, have a strong venom. They are a generalist feeder. So Cape Cobra is literally going to catch everything that it can, and it's going to eat it. There is a ridiculous record of a Cape Cobra eating a tortoise, which is, if you are a snake, about the worst shape of a meal that you can attempt to eat. But yeah, so they're going to prey on lizards, on birds, other snakes, including Cape Cobras. One of their favorite meals are puff adders. In Tswalu, where we studied them, they loved eating sociable weaver chicks. That is actually one of the reasons why we studied them where we studied them, is that you get the sociable weaver bird there. Mm-hmm.
These are those birds that build those nests, like hanging nests out of the trees. Is that right or no?
Yes, okay. Exactly. They look a bit like a thatched roof. Mm-hmm. So it's built out of straws, really, really big, can be 3 or 4 meters wide and 2 meters thick, properly like the size of a small little roof. And you can have hundreds of birds living in there, and they're living in there communally. And they lay the eggs at the same time. And that's a really important food source for the cobras in that region where we studied them. And it's also one of the reasons why we can find them there a lot easier than in other places. Because when the birds are breeding, you can approach the nests. And if you're lucky, there's a Cape Cobra gorging itself.
Is the cobra eating the adults, the eggs, the young birds, all the above?
They would eat all of the above if they could. They're usually too small to catch to not too small, too slow to catch the adults. So they eat eggs and chicks to the point where one time when I caught one of those cobras, when you catch a snake and it's just eaten something, they sometimes regurgitate their food to be able to defend themselves better. And that particular cobra regurgitated 38 eggs and chicks.
Oof. Wow, that's amazing.
So they had just eaten, and I stopped it from eating more. So who knows how many would have gotten. So it's really an all-you-can-eat buffet for these snakes. And at Swalu Kalahari Reserve, which is somewhat where South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana meet in that corner, in the Kalahari Desert. It's a private nature reserve that has a couple of lodges and a research center called Delavan, where they do all kinds of research on arid environment animals. And we did our radio telemetry study there because one of the benefits is that they had an ongoing pygmy falcon study there. And pygmy falcons live in those weaver nests. So we were able to get the coordinates of all weaver nests on the property to go and find the snakes in there. So in the breeding season of
How big is the property?
Oh, I don't actually. The property, I think, is the biggest privately owned game reserve in South Africa.
So it's huge. It's massive. It's not
it's massive.
It's not like 100 hectares or something. No, it's big.
No. I don't have a number in my head, but from one side to another, it was like 1.5 hour drive or something.
Gotcha. Okay. And what's the habitat like? You mentioned these birds, but is it like desert? Is it kind of like a more savanna, grassland, rocky, forest? What is just the general habitat?
So the habitat is threefold. You get this mountain range that goes, the Koranenberg is what they're called. It goes from north-south through the reserve. The mountains are just a couple 100 meters tall, but they're basically rocky outcrops that divides the reserve in half. And on the eastern side of those mountains, it's really shrubby and bushy. And then on the western side, it's dunes with grass.
Okay.
And I had cobras on both sides of those mountains. The Cape Cobras didn't go onto the rocky outcrops. On those rocky outcrops, you'd find black spitting cobras instead. And they were kind of excluding each other, which is really interesting. So they're kind of co-living there, but also not really. The cobras are sticking to the plains and to the dunes. The Cape Cobras are in the plains and the dunes, and the black spitting cobras were on the rocky outcrops. So it's really, the dunes are spectacular. It's just rolling hills of sand, covered with big trees every now and again. It usually has a weaver nest in it, and then golden grass in between.
Yeah. Well, back to your project there. So first of all, I'm assuming you were doing a master's, and it sounds like you turned that master's into a PhD. So it was one big, long project. It wasn't like I did this project and then I did that project. And so, and you've already talked about Brian and Graham kind of giving you these guardrails, if you will, in terms of where and the system you were going to work in and some interest in thermal biology. But how did you talk about like the design of your dissertation research and like how that came about, but like what were you studying? What were the goals? Kind of how were you planning on going about that? Those types of things.
Okay. So basically from the get-go, it is clear that we wanted to use body temperature as a measure for activity patterns. Okay. Like as snakes are ectotherms, you can predict activity patterns by looking at body temperature profiles. And no one had done that for any cobra species before. So that is how the master started. That we wanted to look at, can we predict activity patterns just by looking at body temperature profiles of Cape Cobras? And then from that, it evolved into looking at different thermal thresholds, like what is the target temperature of the Cape Cobra? What is the voluntary max temperature? What body temperatures are these snakes actively selecting and experiencing throughout the year? And how is the habitat shaping those decisions? Are there differences in selected temperatures throughout the year? How are these snakes navigating this really hot and dry environment in the Kalahari? And then with the upgrade to the PhD, I basically had for the master's 2 data chapters written, and then we approached the university and it's like, listen, this project is bigger than this. We're uncovering all this interesting stuff. For example, we found that the body condition of the snake has a dramatic effect on the activity patterns. We found that snakes were active a lot more often than fed snakes throughout the year, including winter, when the conditions were very bad for cobra activity. And every single healthy snake in our database was hiding in the burrow for a few months and didn't cross. And the emaciated snakes were foraging on the surface every single day. So we found all these interesting patterns. So we decided to upgrade this from a master's to a PhD, take it a step to the next step. And I ended up now with 4 data chapters instead. In the end, we implanted 38 Cape Cobras with radio telemetry equipment and thermal loggers. Out of those 38 snakes, we managed to retrieve 24 of them. I don't know how it is in the States, but the technology of Biotica feels very archaic in comparison to the technology we use in our daily life, where it's a VHF transmitter that we're implanting. Every day I would go out and I said we have radio tracked, and I'd report the behavior of the snake, what it was doing at that time, if I could see it, and record its location. And the body temperature logger would record its body temperature in 30-minute intervals. The problem with that kind of data collection is that if I have now radio tracked my cobra every day for a year, and then a year later I want to go catch that snake and download that data set, but on that same day a snake eagle grabs the snake and the snake eagle flies to Botswana with my cobra, I get nothing.
And so did you have like temperature sensitive transmitters, where you could look at? Could you look at like the pulse rates of the transmitters when you're in the field? No. Okay. So basically, you have to physically recover the snake to get the temperature data, but you're getting the location data throughout the year. So I'm sure you had. Well, it sounds like you had 12, or I can't remember, there 12 or 14 animals where you tracked them for a long time, but then weren't able to get the temperature data. So you're getting the body temperature data of the snake, so you can see what the snakes are doing at different times of the day, in different habitats, and throughout the year. What did you measure? Kind of like the available thermal environments, say in different habitat types or at different times of year, like this thermal envelope, if you will. Maybe tell people how you did that to start.
So I measured the thermal quality of the habitat by basically quantifying the upper and the lower end of the temperatures that are available to the snake. So basically, there was a thermal logger in exposed sunlight, whenever the sunlight was available, to measure, okay, this is how hot a cobra could be if it wanted to be. That temperature frequently exceeded 80 degrees Celsius. Which would obviously kill a cobra very, very quickly. We also had a probe in the shade, which is like the coldest temperature available to the snake on the surface. And then we buried a snake model probe 0.5 meter underground, which in the Kalahari is basically for a cobra the furthest away it could be from the sun and the most sheltered it could be. So that means that we within that then had the framework, okay, this is the thermal framework these cobras have to work in. They have to behaviorally thermoregulate within these boundaries and make the decisions based on this.
Yeah. And so for the audience, I think hopefully everybody understood that. But this is pretty common when you're saying like thermal biology of snakes. You're trying to again, I use that word envelope, but what's kind of the hottest and the coolest a snake could get within the environment. You might include underground probes like you were talking about. And then these snakes are generally so good at thermal regulation that then within that envelope, they can select where they want to be thermally based on, whatever factors influence them. Like you said, a low body condition snake might, I would assume from your data, you probably saw that those snakes were at higher body temperatures for longer time periods because they were out moving and probably looking for food or whatever it might be. So anyways, just wanted to kind of restate that for the audience. But so you measured the environment, and then you measured the body temperature of the snakes. You've already mentioned that one interesting result, this idea of the body condition having an influence on snake activity. Did you see any general patterns just in the temperature data, meaning like snakes, always preferred kind of these temperatures, and but they would rise, increase their temperatures to go on a foraging, journey into this nest, and just any kind of general patterns that you saw about temperatures snakes were selecting and how that varied, like cross habitats, cross times of the year, anything like that?
Yeah, we did find a couple of those. One interesting observation, for example, is that the Cape Cobras and the Kalahari at most times of the year do not bask, which is understandable if you know the thermal environment there, where if it's sunrise at 5:30, and let's say we had a nighttime temperatures of 20 degrees Celsius on the surface, sunrise is at 5, and by 5:30, it's going to be above 30 degree Celsius air temperature, which is then too hot for the snake. So those snakes are not wasting time to basking. They're starting to forage in suboptimal conditions to maximize their foraging time. The body temperatures that these snakes would try to achieve usually was in the low 30s, but at around 33 degrees, the snakes would retreat again underground, which is interesting because we didn't measure lethal maximum temperatures in these snakes, but comparable studies make us think that they probably can tolerate up to like 40-ish degrees, maybe 42.
Yeah. And for people, a lot of our listeners will be in the States, and, we obviously have this backwards way of measuring things. But just for the audience's perspective, those numbers in Celsius he's talking about, that initial, say, nighttime to like, so say, I think you said 20 degrees, that would be somewhere like in the 60s Fahrenheit. And then you talked about 30 degrees Celsius, getting to be kind of a high temperature for the snakes. That'd be somewhere, like high 80s Fahrenheit, something like that, just to give our U.S. audience kind of some perspective on that. And sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, sorry. I wouldn't be able to translate the units on the fly.
That's what I'm here for.
Excellent. Yeah, so basically, it's interesting that the snakes are retreated back into shaded areas much sooner than expected. Which is a bit surprising because there are species that's adapted to live in hot and arid conditions, where there could have been, you could make an argument that they're foraging for longer and they're selecting higher temperatures than maybe snakes that live in temperate conditions, but it does not seem to be the case. They retreat when they reach 32 degrees, even though they could probably survive much higher temperatures. And interestingly, the underground temperatures in the Kalahari in summer for most of the year are actually close to 30 degrees Celsius. So in the high 80s Fahrenheit, which is very close to their physiological optimum. So those snakes do not have to be on the surface to reach a preferred temperature. So if the snakes have gotten a large meal, like a large cobra caught another big cobra and doubled its body weight now overnight, these snakes can retreat underground, hide away, and be warm enough 24/7 to have an optimal digestion, a temperature optimal for digestion, which is different in lots of other areas. There are these examples of these pythons here catching big antelopes, springbok and impala and those kind of things. And then those snakes sit in the sun and bask and cook themselves to help the digestion. So that's different there, where while I was in the field, I was observing these snakes being in a burrow for like 4 weeks at a time in summer. And at that point, because I hadn't downloaded the data yet, I didn't know what the temperatures were that they were actually sitting at. And I was getting so worried because you've invested all this money into the snake, you've invested so much time into the snake, and now the snake hasn't moved for 5 weeks, and you've just been radio tracking the same burrow, and you start to think that snake died down there, and it's not okay. And you have to be mentally strong to not dig it up, trust the process. And then suddenly after 5 weeks, the day comes and you go out with your antenna and the radio telemetry, and the snake isn't there anymore, and you're really happy because you know your animal is still alive. And then later on, we realized, okay, those snakes are actually incredibly comfortable in the burrows. They're very happy sitting there at 30 degrees. Even if you're highly venomous cobra in the Kalahari that's 2 meters long, if you can be underground, you'll choose to be underground. It's dangerous out there in the African savanna.
Did you track temperatures in both males and females, or did you focus all on one sex? And if so, if you did females, for example, talk a little bit about kind of their reproductive mode and how, temperature data maybe, either, we'll just talk about temperature and reproduction in cobras, if that's something that was part of your study.
So I did track both. It was just at the end by chance, the split was 50-50 with male and females in the 24 snakes that I managed to download. But we did not really focus on sex-based differences, mostly because we were not able to detect any differences in the data afterwards. But a part of the problem there is that we're not able to tell reproductive status in the females while we're tracking them, because it is not on my radar at that point. Those cobras probably only breed every 3 years.
Really?
And because of infrequent rainfall. So that's what the literature seems to say. In our case, only in 2 snakes did we detect eggs.
And I'm assuming they lay them underground in some form of a burrow, as far as we know, or no? That's
what we assume. These snakes are a big mystery in that regard. I caught 2 cobras that definitely had eggs in them, but we released them again. And then I came across one of them again 6 weeks later, and the eggs were gone. Clearly laid them somewhere. They have to be in a burrow somewhere. Could be also in the weaver nests, but
but then other snakes might eat them.
Yeah, that's also true. But that's also the case in the burrows. My guess is that it's going to be in a burrow. I've seen, I saw very, very few hatchling babies there. The truth is, when it comes to most African snakes, we know very, very little about what they're actually doing with their eggs and what they do as babies as well. In our case,
I was just going to ask, so these cobras, some species of snakes famously kind of stay with their eggs, but I'm assuming this cobra species does not, as far as we know.
I don't think they do, but the thing is, now, if I track a female, for example, and that snake stays in a burrow for 4 weeks and then leaves the burrow, I would not know if there were eggs down there or not.
Yeah, good point.
So we didn't find anything like that. That doesn't mean that's not the case, because we tried to interfere with them as little as possible. So I did not dig up any burrows if I didn't really need to.
Yeah. So you mentioned 3 distinct habitats on this preserve you were working, kind of this more mountainous, rocky, you've got the dunes, the grassy dunes, and then I can't remember the other side. I think it was more shrubby type environment.
Yeah.
Did you see major differences in kind of, 1, the available thermal environments, and 2, how the snakes use those environments among those different habitat types, or not so much?
No, there wasn't much of a difference. Actually, at the time I was there was another master student, and she was looking at the microclimates on the reserve and the distribution. So she was looking at them in depth. And there are obviously differences in between microclimates in the different habitats, but they're all widely available. And the snakes utilize them on both sides. So I did not find any differences in the thermoregulation on the spatial scale.
Gotcha. And so you do this field study, you're learning all these interesting things about just the thermal biology of these snakes, which is all new to science. But from what I've read, you kind of did this within the framework of changing climates. And so, first of all, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but talk a little bit about that part of your dissertation, if that's true. What were some of your hypotheses around like changing climates? How did you model looking forward? Were you just kind of speculating? What's that kind of climate component to your dissertation?
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a break to let you know that you can stay connected to the Orianne Society by signing up for our monthly newsletter. Be the first to receive exciting updates on reptile and amphibian conservation, from the latest news and staff blog posts to exclusive announcements like upcoming Snake Talk podcast guests. Go to our website at www.orianne.org and sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of our homepage.
We can use the cobras as the model organism to understand how snakes are adapting to really hot and really dry conditions, because we're seeing it in the cobras right now. They are the best adapted large active foraging snake in this area to these kind of conditions. So we're able to look at the temperatures that these snakes are selecting, the temperatures these snakes are avoiding, how they're changing their activity pattern to thrive in conditions that are really, really challenging for other animals. And by doing that, we just get a better grasp of the threats that climate change is posing to other snakes in other areas.
Yeah, very interesting. So with your dissertation work, we talked a little bit just kind of about, what you found with the general thermal biology, and we talked about kind of the framework for, kind of changing climates and impacts. Are there any other like big highlight areas from your dissertation that you think we're missing?
I personally really like the activity part of it. How we're using a temperature profile of a snake to be able to tell precisely if that snake was active or not. And I know other people have done it on a whole bunch of snakes, but it's just something that's incredibly fascinating, where we're able to, you walk into the field, like I'm just going to explain to the people, I don't know if they're not familiar with how this kind of thing works, but basically you're radio tracking your snake and you walk into the field and you find a cobra, and the cobra is sitting under a tree, and then it climbs up the tree and eats a bird and climbs down again. And then half a year later, you download your body temperature data from that snake, and you go back to that same moment and you look at the pattern in the body temperature, and then you can pinpoint, okay, that is how the pattern looks like when a snake sits under a tree, climbs up a tree, eats something, climbs back down. And you do that 1,000 times. And then without having ground truthed, you can look for that same shape in that body temperature data to then say, oh, even though I wasn't there on that particular day, that snake sat under the tree, climbed the tree, ate a bird, and come back down. And we did that for all 24 snakes where we had that we radio tracked at least for a year each, which then just reveals these really interesting trends of when the snakes are active, what kind of temperatures are limiting, how they're responding to environmental change like rainfall and those kind of things, purely on an activity level. Like, is the snake active? Yes or no? I personally did not look at distance moved or those kind of spatial data. We recorded all of this, but that's a different PhD student that's currently working on that. And that is personally one of my highlights.
That's really cool. So essentially, you're looking at the temperature data of the snake, but just looking at the patterns in that data, like when temperatures might go up or down or whatever that pattern might be, you can, with some level of accuracy, predict what activity that snake is involved in. That's really cool. Any other, you mentioned the snake going up the tree to feed. Are there any other activities that were really you could really kind of easily distinguish in the temperature data and then kind of extrapolate to all your animals?
Yeah, I mean, that was now just the example how of an activity that a snake would do. It is like the most obvious one is the snake emerging from a burrow or from a retreat where it is hiding. Could also be a tree cavity. Because basically when the snakes are inactive, their thermal conform, so their body temperature is no longer changing. It's now the same as the environmental temperature. And in my data, it would look like a flat line. So it's a horizontal line. The snake is just sitting in a burrow. And then usually in the early morning, just before sunrise, the body temperature would drop. That means that the snake has now left its warm and cozy hole, and it's on the surface, where it's a little bit colder than the burrow. And then the body temperature would fluctuate around certain thresholds, where the snake would usually try to stay at just above 30 degrees at 31.8 degrees Celsius, would fluctuate around that threshold. The snake would try to stay in that range for as long as possible. And when that was no longer possible, it would retreat back underground. There are still so many gems hidden in that data set, I'm sure, that we haven't deciphered yet. We had an accumulated 11 years of snake data that was way beyond the scope of my PhD or even Kim's PhD. I'm sure someone could look at shedding cycles in those snakes, because I found that these snakes were shedding synchronously. When I find one snake was going into shed, sure enough, the next couple of days, the other ones would also start going into shed, even though they're completely wild and free-ranging and no one's interfering with them. And I didn't even touch that thermobiology aspect of that, because it also has temperature demands and things that go into it. And same with digestion. There's 100% something hidden in there with how they thermoregulate after having eaten something. And we have all of that data. It just wasn't part of my work.
That is really cool. And we could talk for a long time about this. But I do think, some of the things you're talking about now, kind of these unknowns and work other people are doing, kind of will segue us a little bit, and we can begin heading towards wrapping this episode up. So you finished your PhD, you found out, really just kind of all these interesting novel things about this species and its ecology. Kind of there's the applied components relative to changing climates and what it's going to mean for the snake. You said you no longer live in Johannesburg. So what does the future hold? Are you staying in South Africa, moving back to Germany? You going to go into academia, or what are your plans?
I'm definitely going to stay in South Africa. If you study the snakes in Southern Africa, it's going to be hard to do field biology related work in Germany. I don't think I'll be able to do that. I found a girlfriend in South Africa. She's from Cape Town. So we're now both living here in KwaZulu-Natal. I've been starting to do some environmental impact assessment work as a reptile specialist, which has been really rewarding. I've dived more into the photography side of things. I really like photographing snakes and lizards. And I've done
I will say, as an aside, I looked up your Instagram page, and man, you take incredible photographs.
Thank you. Yeah, so that is definitely a passion that I still want to continue. Basically, I literally graduated 4 weeks ago, so it's still now the early days of not being a student anymore. But if I can find something that combines my just passion for being outside, hopefully surrounded by snakes, answering interesting questions that intrigue me, and doing some photography on the side, I'll be happy. But yeah, we'll see. I'm going to find something along those lines. And in the meantime, I'm going to carry on with the project-based work and doing environmental work.
Well, it sounds like the future is wide open. Outside of, your geography, you found your home. So that's great. Well, before we wrap up here, I like to have all of my guests tell me a snake story. So, Thilo, do you have a good snake story for us?
Yeah, I think I have a good one. So at one point at Swallow in the Kalahari there, they were running live safari TV. It's called Wild Earth, where they live stream game drives from a safari vehicle. And at that point, the guy that is running the live stream, he was calling me and he said, Thilo, we're sitting here, there are 2 Cape Cobras foraging together, probably a male and a female. Could you come catch them for your project and talk to us on live TV to our guests about the work you do? And I was really excited. I was like, yes, let's go. I jumped into my car. I grabbed 2 buckets and I raced out there. And on the way there, I encountered another Cape Cobra on the road. So I think, well, what are the chances that those 2 snakes are still there when I get there? Let me just grab this one. So I grab the mystery cobra that was just on the road and I carry on to the spot where the guy had been calling from. And I get there and sure enough, those 2 snakes are still there. So now I have a bucket problem because you cannot put multiple cobras into one bucket. They're going to eat each other. But the third container I had was not as ideal to capture a highly venomous snake on live TV. It was not quite as big as the 2 that I had prepared for the TV thing. So my idea was to quickly decant the captured cobra already behind my car, shielded from the audience, into the smaller container so I can be all professional and prepared when I do it on camera. And of course, something went wrong. As I want to move the cobra into the smaller container, it slips from my grip and it gets into my car. And snakes in cars are an absolute nightmare to get out. They're good at hiding in there. And it's a problem. So I went over to the guide that was doing the live TV stuff. And I went behind the camera and I was like, listen, do not point your camera at me or at my car. There's a cobra in there that I first need to get out. You cannot show me trying to capture a snake. That has
Come on, that's good TV.
Yeah, I would have gotten into lots and lots of trouble with the reserve. So then basically was just poking around my own car behind the scenes, quickly getting the snake out of my car. And I did find it. It was under the bonnet, behind the light. And I managed to catch it, put it in a smaller container, and then also caught the 2 cobras on live TV and everything ended well. But yeah, I was quite stressed.
That's a great story. I wish I could watch it on TV, but anyways, great. Well, Thilo, I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for joining us today on Snake Talk.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is a really, really cool experience. I really enjoyed this. This is fun.
Great. And I just wanted to tell our audience to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.